Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to Bitcoin and Beyond. I'm Melanie Carstens. We are here on X and YouTube every Thursday at 12 p.m. ET. And just a huge shout out to the organized media who are behind the scenes making this happen today. I am super excited to be joined by my very special guest, Kevin Williams. Hi.
How are you doing? Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm very excited to chat to you and find out a little bit more about investing in Bitcoin and what it takes and what we're actually growing out here. It's been interesting to watch it over the last couple of years, grow to where it is now. So yeah, let's see what the future holds as well. I want to kick it off with your studies. I was interested to find out when I was reading your LinkedIn that you studied speech and hearing science.
I did, yes. And I am doing now absolutely nothing with that degree.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? How did that? I mean, you've worked in global startups. You've probably you've changed countries. Um, how did that happen? Why did you study speech and hearing? And how did you transition out of that and end up in Bitcoin?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a crazy story, and I think you're the first person that's ever asked me this, which is quite fun.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so coming out of high school, I was quite interested in this notion of international affairs. So when I decided to go to George Washington University, the very first major for me was international affairs. And as I kind of kicked off the program, I really realized I did not enjoy a lot of the history classes. So for me, coming from high school where I took every science and math based AP course possible, I was more of a science and math person. So um, as I was looking around to see kind of what was really interesting, I obviously love sports. I thought exercise science would be a great fit for me. Um, but I took one sign language class with an absolutely amazing professor, and I just fell in love with sign language. So I took several semesters of sign language, and that kind of just parlayed itself into me looking into the speech and hearing kind of major. And then I just decided to move forward with that instead of international affairs or exercise science. And the transition out of this into the tech world was definitely unique. The junior year going into my senior year when I was at GW, which is in DC, I had an internship with a company called car to go. So these really small, tiny smart cars, which you can become a member, you can take a car, you can tap on the car, you can jump in and you can rent that car and you can drive it. And you can park it anywhere on the street in Washington, DC.
I
So if
remember that.
any
I remember that
you
trip. And that was with
yeah.
bikes. Well, I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. Um, so Car2Go was a subsidiary of Daimler Benz, which is a
Yeah.
major conglomerate from Germany. And Car2Go just came to Washington D.C. It was growing in popularity. So I think from their perspective, they had another subsidiary called My Taxi, which was a big time competitor to Uber. So they were just coming into their very first market in the U.S., which was Washington D.C. And this is pre Uber X. Okay. This is when it was predominantly Uber Black and then taxis, like licensed regulated taxis.
Yeah.
So for me, it was really fun being this super young kid, extremely ambitious in a totally new world where I'm competing against Travis Kalanick and the monster, which is Uber, right? So it was
Yeah.
my role to go and recruit all these taxi drivers to join the My Taxi platform. And after like the first several months, we recruited thousands of taxi drivers and we grew this network where now anybody in Washington, D.C. could hail a taxi using an app instead of using Uber Black, which was significantly more expensive. So this is the segue into kind of my whole tech career. So I was really fortunate, coming out of college to immediately be able to go into this kind of associate GM role, which then allowed me to grow into GM positions of other companies in the transportation tech sector.
Mm. That is quite a story. What made you decide, what was it that you decided to look at sign language? Was it just something you were fascinated with, or had you been exposed to sort of hearing and sign and that previously?
Um, so I think one of the key things was in the undergraduate program, you had to learn a language, right? You typically have to take like one or two language courses. And there were all these options, French, Spanish, etc. And for me, I was like, I took Spanish in high school. I learned German in high school as well. Um, Born and grew up in Indonesia, so I obviously knew Indonesian as kind of my native language. So I wanted to. Uh, I see a comment there. Yo, Bang Kevin. Hello, selamat malam. So for me, I want to learn something new, something different, right? And I was
Yeah.
like, okay, sign language sounds really cool. And in Washington D.C., you have one of the top um, deaf universities in the world in Gallaudet. So I knew that there was a community there, and it was just super interesting for me. And my professor was absolutely amazing. So for me, that's how I got started, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. It's really sad to say I probably haven't used it as much, so I don't really still remember much. But in that time in college, it was like super exciting.
Yeah, that's very interesting and wonderful. Right, so you kind of had this journey through study, through sort of getting into startup. Um, how did that lead then into Bitcoin?
Yep, that's a great question. So one of my best friends from high school, um, we were a part of this thing called the Science Academy in high school, which is basically a group of 8 students. We were in the same classes every single day for all 4 years in high school. And one of those eight also happened to be one of my really close friends from high school. We ran track together. We were very close friends. Is Ryan Shea, who is one of the
Oh,
co-founders of Stacks.
yeah.
Um, so as time progressed, Ryan went to Princeton. I went to GW. There were moments where Ryan came to visit me when I was in DC. And I think very early days, I started hearing Bitcoin stacks, what he was doing with Munib. Obviously, I didn't really catch on at the time. I think it really took until block stack days for me to realize that this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And jumping into the world of, okay, builders can build things on Blockstack and be rewarded, right? Because they had these kind of like epics where you could be rewarded as an early builder in the ecosystem. So that was the very first moment that I started paying attention. And of course, being a friend, I supported Stacks. So super early days on OKCoin. My mom and I are buying Stacks very early. We're stacking on OKCoin. I think I tweeted the other day a screenshot. um, so we've been DCAing for a very long time, and that was like the initial moment that I kind of started to pay attention in this space. Everything really hit ahead, I think, during the pandemic when I was at home, just really trying to figure out what to do outside of my full-time job at the time. And that was really the moment that I started, looking at X more often or Twitter at the time, starting to look at all these chartists posting charts about different tokens, and I started kind of diving in a little bit more than I previously had been. And fast forward to 2021, I did a venture fellowship remotely in Singapore with a fund in Singapore, and I was focusing on the Web3 space. So that was the very first time I kind of dove into the venture world, Web3, starting to source different companies, talk to founders, understand what they're doing, and present it to an IC. Um, Although we didn't get any incentives, carry, or anything like that, it was just more to learn and understand. And it just happened that TO, the famous TO, had posted something on Twitter at the time saying that they were looking to hire a junior analyst. So I just reached out and like, yo, Trev, like I'm really interested in this. And timing just worked out absolutely perfectly. And I am extremely humbled and grateful that he gave me the opportunity.
Yeah. Jeez, it's amazing how it works. It just feels like everybody feels like they know each other. It's this wonderful time that I think I said to a friend of mine the other day, I think we're going to look back one day and, specifically I've only been in the ecosystem for 4 years, I think, also, so around 5 years now. But it's such a lovely, warm time, where everybody, you say TO, and I think there's so many people probably watching that know exactly who you're talking about,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard so many stories of just people sort of reaching out on Twitter or X and getting jobs. It's like this crazy, crazy world. Anyway, right. So you kind of exposed to stacks. How did you end up? I wanted to ask you. How did you end up from Washington to where did you say you were then? Have you been in Jakarta? Right? No.
Yeah. So it was 2015. I decided to take the leap and move to Singapore. So I was
Mm,
living in Singapore from 2015 until 2019, just like right before the pandemic. Um, and
amazing.
then during the time of the pandemic, Indonesia was very, very closed down. Um, and I guess so was I in the US, coped up into my attic at my mom's house. Um, I just knew I needed something different. So I was looking at all the regulations in Indonesia. How the heck can I move to Indonesia? Like I knew I wanted to do it for myself personally. Um, I wanted to get back to Indonesia, be entrenched in the culture, make sure that I don't lose the language. So for me, it was a really important, like personal mission of mine. So during the pandemic in June and July 2021, Indonesia had enforced a complete lockdown. If you came into Indonesia, you needed to get all your tests, and you needed to quarantine. So
Cool.
the day that I decided to fly, um, I booked a Japan Airlines ticket, and it was I think me and maybe 10 people total in
Oh,
on the whole
what?
plane. I swear. They bumped me to business class and
That's
everything.
wonderful.
Like there was so few people on the plane that the pilot was not sure if he actually even wanted to take off. So we just sat on the plane for about an hour waiting for them to actually decide if they wanted to go or not because there were so few people on the plane. And by the way, I might be exaggerating with 10, it might be 20, but it was not a lot of people at all.
Let's just say a lot less than. But
Yes,
what a
yes.
surreal time. What a surreal. I still can't, like, sometimes I think to myself that I lived through that, you know?
Same, same. Honestly,
Jeez.
same. And then like when I took off, I think the quarantine was 3 days. And then like when I landed, the quarantine got bumped up to like 7 or 8 days. So I was stuck inside of a hotel. Uh, fortunately, Indonesian people are very nice, so they really took care of us. I'm like, can I get some gym equipment in the room, at least some dumbbells, so I can do something? Because being in a room for like 8 days, it plays with your mind a
Yeah.
lot.
That is like being in jail. I mean, that is like solitary
Yeah,
confinement.
yeah,
It is so wild. We would walk out of quite in it's already, it's near the southern tip of Africa. So there's already not a lot of people. And we were allowed to walk, we were allowed to walk in the streets, during certain hours of the day. And we would walk and not see a soul. It was like, what the hell? Anyway, what a crazy time. Okay, so right, so you were back in your roots, and then you kind of obviously spoke to Trevor, and you started up with the Bitcoin Frontier Fund, right? So
yeah.
started,
Bitcoin Frontier Fund,
yeah.
before it was called Bitcoin Frontier Fund, was Stacks Ventures, STACKS Ventures. So it was
Oh,
the
remember
ecosystem
that.
fund
When was that? That
for.
was changed to Bitcoin Frontier Fund.
So I joined, I believe, April or May of 2022. I think May. Um, and it was like towards the tail end of that year when I remember, um, I'm just going to say Tio, okay? When
Yeah.
Tio sends a message to like everybody and it's like, pretty much, um, something big is coming. It's called Ordinals. Take a look at it. So this was like before anybody had really even knew what Ordinals was. He was like almost immediately one of the very first ones that
Yeah.
was on it.
Yeah.
And And I think from that moment, there was a pretty big push internally at Bitcoin Frontier Fund to open up the thesis a little bit outside of just
Yeah.
purely stacks. And it was such an amazing experience, like being able to be hands-on with the founders through multiple cohorts of the accelerator. I mean, there were founders across some massive companies that are some of the biggest names in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Being able to work with those founders on a daily basis,
Mm.
seeing how a fund works, how a fund operates, and obviously, having the opportunity to represent the fund at the time at all these different conferences, speaking on panels, etc. So it was a really momentous moment in my life and in my career that
Yeah.
um, personally I'm grateful for because it honestly changed everything for me.
Mm. Yeah, what an experience. I mean, sort of how many people in the world are going to get that opportunity, and live through what you live through, on Bitcoin. So
Yep.
quite extraordinary. Yeah, I feel even I'm not, nowhere near sort of involved, but I've been around, and I still feel privileged that I've seen this journey for these last 5 years. Okay, so let's talk. Your role kind of, I mean, obviously, while with the Bitcoin Frontier Fund, you kind of led investing, and obviously hooked up with, or led investments with like Liquidium, I think Bitflow, Stacking DAO. I don't know if they were involved at that time, but a lot of Taproot Wizards as well. I think that was part of the when I was reading into it. So you were kind of handling them then, and I see you still involved in terms of on an advisory role and an investment role on some of them. I mean, these are some big names in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Specifically, I mean, I think most of them on Stacks, Liquidium, Bitflow, Stacking DAO. Do you want to talk about that sort of experience and what it's like? You sort of touched on it just now, working with these people on a day-to-day basis, and kind of lessons for people. I think I just want to touch on that for people who are watching and who kind of, are on the periphery of bringing something to Bitcoin. Just sort of a couple of things about that time, and what stood out for you with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
So
The
I'll
broad
talk
question.
about I'll talk about a couple of them. So Liquidium and Bitflow were both a part of the same cohort uh, during the accelerator program for Bitcoin Frontier Fund. So we got to really see kind of front and center both of those companies as they grew up. And the interesting thing is that um, both of them had also gone through the BTC Startup Lab. So in that process, for example, with Robin, when he shared his pitch deck with me, it was not called Liquidum. It was called NFT to Loan, building something very similar but on stacks. And and I remember very vividly, it was like one of the very first times that I was actually pitching a company to IC, right? And the IC was consisted of a few people at the Bitcoin Frontier Fund. So for me, it was really talking with Robin, getting an understanding of exactly what he's trying to build, getting an understanding of the early traction, the cap table, doing the initial due diligence that would be required to pitch a company to the investment committee. And during the first pitch, of course, there's always, hey, here's further questions, here's additional things that we want to dive into, and then it's just a matter of going back and forth. So when NFT to loan at the time was finally accepted into the cohort, it just happened to be that same exact time when Ordinals was just starting. And that was the moment that basically TO was like, all right, this is your make or break moment. I think there's something big here, and you guys
Mm.
can be at the forefront of this.
Well,
And that's when Robin, Pete, and the team, decided to kind of make that change from NFT to loan
yeah.
over to Liquidium. So, when I'm saying like leading these investments, I'm saying that in the sense of I'm a lot of times towards the tail end doing a lot of the due diligence, obviously not without support from other members of the team, but the kind of person who is going back and forth with the founder, getting all the documents together, working with Francisco, who was the kind of legal and finance partner, to go through the documents to make sure that all the documents are exactly what we're looking for. And then when everything is signed by TO, then working with Francisco to get the transfer of the payment over to the
Wow.
founder. So um, Liquidium and Bitflow, after they had graduated, were both companies that I obviously worked with very closely, got to know the founders, and Liquidium happened to be my very first like angel investment check that I ever wrote was
Wow.
into Robin and Liquidium. Um, and just kind of helping them, connecting them with as many investors as possible, talking with them through strategy. So these are some of the things that I absolutely love doing. I think being at the earliest stage possible with these founders, it's the hardest thing to do because you're always on an island. If you're writing the first, second, third, or fourth check, you're always on an island. You don't know this is going to work. So you
Mm,
have to really roll your sleeves up and work very closely with a lot of these founders. So um, yeah, personally, I had the fortunate ability to invest into Liquidium, Bitflow. I also wrote a small check into Stacking DAO, one of the very first few. And yeah, I mean, a lot of these companies I obviously introduced to, brought them to the table for the IC, Bitcoin Frontier Fund, and they all made investments into these amazing companies. So I take no credit. I just did whatever I had to do, and it was ultimately the general partner's decision, which is TO. And the mantra has always been, you back the best founders, and you
mm.
work with them on a daily basis to get them to where they need to be.
Do you think it's a lot about, I mean, ideas are important, right? But do you think it's a lot about the people?
Oh, 100%. Because
Yeah.
like half the companies that are a part of the Science Ventures portfolio, I mean, they think about building this thing, and then they start seeing the market move, and then they pivot, and then they pivot very quickly.
Mm,
And sometimes that pivot is absolutely necessary. And if you can't make that pivot quickly,
mm,
you're just going to be dead in the water. You're just swimming there, waiting for someone to come and save you. But the ship has sailed, right? You got to go and you got to go figure that out. So for us, one of the very first investments that we ever made was into a company called Net Worth, which I'm sure nobody on this stream will even know what that is. Um, but Net Worth is now SATS Terminal, which is
yeah.
one of the top, if not the number one DeFi aggregation protocol on Bitcoin.
Mm,
So what the original product was, and when we invested, is very different from what the product was now. But
mm,
that's really us seeing the founders, seeing the talent,
mhm.
investing into the founders, and then working with them to figure out what's actually underneath the hood of what they've built. How can we extract this and create greater value?
Yeah. 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 Interesting. What do you think is, I mean, obviously, it's a very new ecosystem, the Bitcoin ecosystem, and sort of the L2 and the other protocols that are kind of building out. Um, and it's a strange question I'm going to ask you because it's going to lead into something else. But what do you think is still missing? What are we building that's still what's still going to happen? Because I mean, it seems very sort of DeFi focused. Um, and how close are we to this kind of mass adoption? How people friendly? I think that's where I'm going with this. Are we at a point where this is people friendly and I mean, just sort of the general public?
Yeah.
Because whenever I have a conversation with anybody and I even just mention Bitcoin, like sort of a glaze comes over and then a fear. How long am I going to talk about this? But they seem afraid of it. And I'm just curious, what is it? How are we going to get there? Because we're not that. Are we that close? Are we?
I think we are. Um, but this is me saying I think we are haphazardly because from on the surface, right? You think about um, adoption in a few different ways. So for me, I think what's happening in the Bitcoin ecosystem is a relatively clear divide now of um, a couple of things. One, which is like supreme TradFi stuff, and
Mm,
then on-chain stuff, right? So if we look at the TradFi bucket, I mean, we're basically seeing a carbon copy of strategy everywhere, right? Everybody wants to be the strategy in their respective countries.
Yeah.
So there's going to be one in every country, let's say, as an example. But all of those companies are all buying Bitcoin. So do we consider that adoption, or do we not consider that adoption? I think that's like the very first question. Because if we do consider people buying Bitcoin and people buying the vehicles that are acquiring Bitcoin via stocks, then maybe we can consider that adoption. But if we're talking about like the on-chain adoption, right? People actually buying Bitcoin as a store of value and people potentially participating in on-chain DeFi activities, then I think we are very, very far away from that.
Yeah.
And we have obviously Lightning, which is predominantly payment-based, but I think Lightning is adapting and changing very quickly, with taproot assets. And we're seeing a lot of layer twos. I think Stacks and Core are at the forefront at the moment, but Arch has just raised 13 million. Arch is going to be a big player in this. So I think what needs to happen is that all these applications are basically trying to silo themselves at the moment, right? They're like, I'm the DEX on this layer two. I'm the lending protocol on this layer two. When, in my opinion, you're really kind of closing yourself off to the broader public. So what we're starting to see now is kind of, I think, what I would consider the last wave of adoption, and that is people are actually starting to think more in a Web 2 sense than in a Web 3 sense. And this is the funny part, right? We were so obsessed for such a long time. Everything's got to be on chain.
Yeah.
But at the end, normies wanting to get on chain is like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. What wallet do I use? Do I have to do a multi-sig? Is it a hardware wallet? Like, you can go to any normal person and tell them to set up a ledger, and they'll probably just, stare at you in the face like you have three eyes. Like, how the hell does this thing work?
It's the language. Sometimes my husband says to me, "You've just said a sentence, and I don't even understand one of the words in the sentence, let alone what the sentence means."
Yeah.
And you
So I think
get so used to using that terminology that it just feels normal. And you kind of have to take this step back. That's why I'd love to, this whole Web 2 thing where you kind of go to where the people are and then bring them.
Yep. So what we've been seeing, SS Ventures very recently has been a lot more focus around taking like Web 2 technology. I mean, I'm positioning it like it's a bad thing, but it's not, right? It's like taking the DeFi rails and then kind of wrapping it in this very easy to understand Web 2 sense, right? So let's say an application that's in the App Store that you can download, utilizing passkeys, which is a relatively newer technology that people obviously use with their iPhone every single day. And then being able to buy Bitcoin, sell Bitcoin, get really simple and easy to use like yield strategies inside of that wallet. I think the normal individual might not necessarily be so obsessed with like the security aspects like we do, because we're on chain and we see all the crazy shit that's happening. Where everything for me, it's like, it's got to be in a multi-sig on a Signa or on Coffer Network, or it's got to be on my ledger. I have 3 or 4 ledgers behind me, so I got to make sure that, everything's in a multi-sig connected to ledgers. Like, I don't think normal people are even going to bother with that, right?
No.
Like, my parents have bought Bitcoin on Gemini, and it just sits on Gemini for years. So,
what happened to me, somebody who's been in the industry for 5 years, I had my Leather and my X1st wallets, and I was just plowing things in. But the problem with me was I became so kind of, in the beginning, I was so afraid. I mean, I would sit, if I had to do anything, and stare at it for like half an hour before I pressed, the button, because I didn't know where that button was going to take me. That's what I was afraid of. It got to the point where I was doing things, I'd be on a Spaces and I'd be buying things and moving things around, while I was talking. My wallet was drained. 10 accounts, my whole wallet, everything, last 2 weeks ago. Literally before last week's show. It happened just before I spoke to Taco last week.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
I know. So, it's terrible. It's like I nearly just went, okay, close my computer and just go to the beach and never come back from the beach. But yeah, I just can't think about it. I just got to keep going, and this is a hard lesson. But yeah, 5 years of everything in those 10 accounts in one stupid wallet. I mean, what an idiot. I went and literally bought 3 devices. The next day, I've got nothing. I've got $60 in my wallet. But hey, it's very secure.
I'm so sorry to hear that. That's
Yeah,
terrible.
yeah, it is. It's terrible, but it is what it is. But going back to what you're saying, I mean, these are things that, and I keep saying to people, because they say it to me a lot, it's full of scammers, and they love it that my wallet was drained, of course, because it's like, we told you it was scammy. And I'm like, it's not scammy. That is just, when you are interacting with your banking app, this is happening behind the scenes. It's just that the security measures that they've put in place are preventing all those hackers from getting to your fiat. It still exists. It's not like all the scammers on crypto,
It,
Um,
it it does exist, and it does happen. My dad was, I believe it was last year, like somebody went to a random branch of a bank and like withdrew money from his account, and it was not him. So yeah, like these things happen, but they're not very publicly displayed and known because it's not on chain necessarily. Um,
Anyway, sorry, I digress.
no, but I think that this is a really interesting topic, and the reason why is I think getting to my ultimate point in this is I think a lot of people are starting to realize like the thesis is going to change a little bit, right? I think we have enough layer ones and layer twos. Like, let's be real. Half of
Yeah.
these L1s and L2s have nobody building anything on them. So, all like we as VCs can make these investments and the investments can do really well. But at the end, I mean, we're looking at like hundreds of ghost chains by the end of this year.
Mm,
So you have to build applications on these chains regardless, right? And you need to build an economy and you need to build an ecosystem where people are actually utilizing these
mm,
DeFi rails. So what I think is going to happen, and this is a part of the thesis, is that I think because Bitcoin is really hitting this mainstream adoption, right? You're going to have the people who obviously don't want to worry about any of this stuff, right? They don't want to worry about hardware wallets, multi-sigs, etc. They're just probably going to buy the Bitcoin ETF and let the big boys handle all of the security risk. Um, but then you're also going to have a whole bunch of these countries, I think, eventually adopt a very different set of regulations potentially around
mm,
Bitcoin and around crypto. And when that happens, there will potentially be licenses that need to be acquired by each individual country, each governing body, whatever the case is. Um, and when that happens, it's very hard for a company from the US to like cover their ground in every country, right?
yeah.
It's very, very difficult to do. And a lot of times, bigger companies will just acquire smaller ones, or they'll acquire a company that's, let's say, for example, dominant here in Indonesia to get the users, to get the infrastructure, the on ramp, off ramp, et cetera, right? So I think what's going to happen is something very similar in the Bitcoin space. I think we're going to start seeing more dApps that are basically Web2 kind of conversions with
Mm,
Web3 in the background go out and be able to raise successfully, be able to acquire a lot of users successfully, and be able to generate revenue and build long-term businesses successfully all around Bitcoin.
mm, mm.
And I think that that's not going to happen on a global level. I think it's going to happen on a local level. So per country, per region, we're going to start seeing that.
Mm. Yeah, okay. It's very clear to me now. I see what you're saying, because again, we live in this ecosystem that almost feels like a country. It feels, it's very interesting. I've been very interested in the network state and what Balaji's doing, and I know Electra Frost very well. She's kind of, and this idea of cloud first, land second. And we were talking about how Stacks actually feels like we live there. It's like we could take everybody and put them down somewhere. So you kind of, yeah, I haven't actually thought about it that way, but it's got to happen per country, because I mean, tax laws, money laws, it's also different, even though we sending this money, this idea of we can send money to everybody anywhere, but when it gets there, it still has to be accounted for. So
Yeah,
in
I
some way,
mean,
unless you live
on our,
in a Bitcoin friendly.
yeah, I mean, the utopian would be that everything is Bitcoin related, right?
Yeah,
Our stable coins are all on Bitcoin.
which is, yeah,
We just all buy Bitcoin, and
yeah,
Bitcoin sits there, and then we just take a loan against our Bitcoin for our daily needs,
yeah,
right? That's like the absolute like utopian
yeah,
for me, and I think for many people as well.
yeah.
Um, I just think like with all the differentiated like on ramp and off ramp solutions that are required for every country, the regulations for each company in all these countries to operate. And then we have the giant barrier of app stores. Sometimes, and many times here in Indonesia, like, my phone is from the US. I can't download applications that are like Indonesia specific. So I have to use my other phone that I have for just Indonesia specifically.
Right.
And I know that this is not just the case in Indonesia. I think this is also the case in many countries as well.
Yeah.
So this is why we see centralized exchanges in different countries
Mm,
rather than like Coinbase in every country, right? Like
mm,
Upbit is very successful in one particular market.
mm,
So I think that this is going to be the case with Bitcoin. It's just a matter of where will the back end be, right?
mm,
Will the back end be on stacks?
mm,
Because somebody can buy Bitcoin, convert it to SBTC, use Zest, use Granite, maybe
mm,
take out a loan, and then they get Hermetica's USDH.
yeah.
You can do all these things on stacks, right? But if you had a dedicated like in-market partner that wrapped that up in a Web2 skin, I think you'd have a really good hit on your hand. But it's all built on stacks. So stacks wins. All the individual applications within a stacks ecosystem wins. But
Mm,
you still need that like local partner to kind of get all these things into play.
mm. I think also what, I kind of feel as a slight outsider, I mean, I have used all of, I've used all of them over the years as each sort of new DeFi platform emerged, whatever. I played around with it just to purely understand it and stuff. Um, but what was I going to say about it now? Oh God, it's the fog. It's the COVID fog that just never quite left my brain. I swear to God, I don't know what's happening. Um, anyway, it'll come to me just now. Um, Damn it. Anyway, all right. Well, I'll come back to that. Hopefully, I'll remember it just now. Yes, this is live and not unedited. Or not edited, I mean. What I did want to talk to you about was this idea that right now, obviously, it's very DeFi heavy, right? We kind of had this huge, I think, in many ways, what gave this whole idea, I mean, the idea of building on Bitcoin, making Bitcoin scalable, doing something with Bitcoin so that it wasn't just a store of value. That had been something that I found was basically just very small. Obviously, it was with stacks, and a lot of people kind of was like, oh, it's Corey, whatever his name was, just constantly saying, it's whatever it is. But I feel like Ordinals were very responsible in many ways for kind of just putting this massive, it just felt like it was, all of a sudden it was everywhere. Everybody wanted to kind of be involved with L2s and build on Bitcoin after Ordinals. And this attention obviously came into L2s like stacks after the situation with Ordinals. But it's weird because that was art. And yet what we're building is very DeFi focused. Do you think that, and what is your interest in things that are beyond DeFi? Do you think that we have to get DeFi 100% running smoothly and bring the adoption in through that? Or do you think we're going to move into sort of a cultural building culturally as well, and give that kind of, because I'm curious about the fact, the reason I'm asking this is I kind of feel like sometimes it's a bit cold with just
Hmm.
DeFi, and it's kind of you do it and then you kind of, that's your dopamine hit, you kind of go, or your excitement, and you kind of, and then you kind of just have to wait until, you've earned your rewards, or, it just, I kind of think about what people are doing. They're watching Netflix, they're gaming, they're doom scrolling. You were talking about Web2 and sort of wrapping it in that sort of thing. What are your thoughts on kind of Bitcoin moving further into the realm of the creative, where people, giving people something more to do than just invest their money?
That's an interesting question. Um, I think the first question that I would ask back is how many people buy Ordinals because they truly love the art, right? If they do, then I think we are on the path to building this cultural assembly within the Bitcoin ecosystem. Because I do think a lot of people are still in Ordinals not for the art, right? They're in still for the speculative component of
Course, it's a DeFi thing, even though it's got a picture on it. Yeah.
yes, yeah. Um, so like most things, I think Bitcoin, the underlying asset, is the cultural movement, period.
Mm,
Right? It's the kind of hedge against this inflationary monetary period that we're kind of going through. So I think people, generally speaking, and we saw the massive growth in the gold price. So people are already like, okay, we're about to see the money printer go burr. We see where gold is going. We've been having this conversation for years now that Bitcoin is the digital gold. And like, frankly, I'm not gonna, well, you can't lug around tons of gold, right? It's people don't realize like all the gold is sitting in like one or a couple of vaults. Like I
mhm.
think one of the countries, the majority of our gold is sitting in a vault in like London or something. um,
Crazy. Let's go to
right. So
London. Get some masks and go to London.
I mean, the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it might have a lot of these properties of what everybody considers to be as with gold, but the very big differences are obviously it's all on chain, right?
Mm,
We can bring it with us, we can utilize it, we can do a lot of things with it. Whereas gold, it's like it's there, right?
mm.
I mean, maybe we buy a chain, but that's not going to give us $1 million.
Yeah.
So I just
Yeah,
think Bitcoin itself.
sorry.
Yeah, I just think Bitcoin itself, like the underlying asset, is already the cultural movement. I don't think we need to have anything else outside of it, right? We're seeing, in some regions of Africa where people are transacting on Lightning. Like
Mhm,
that's their daily, transactional value for everyday things. They
mm,
treat Bitcoin as this cultural movement already.
mm,
And I think that's the thing that we should be concerned more about is how do we take Bitcoin and how do we make it be at the top of everybody's minds?
mm,
Maybe it's not around spending Bitcoin as payment. Maybe it's, utilizing whether it's USDT on Lightning via Taproot Assets or it's one of our portfolio companies, Bima or Hermetica, utilizing those stable coins to make everyday purchases, or whether it's through a debit card of some sort that's connected to your wallet. Like these are all things that can and will and are happening on Bitcoin.
mhm,
And that's the cultural movement, right? It's like USD, the cash, the piece of paper that's in our hand is no longer relevant.
mm. Yeah.
So I think we're already there. It just happens to not be a JPEG. Um,
Mm,
but we're already on our path to this cultural movement. I think we're kind of going through this revolution of sorts where
mm,
people are not as concerned about USD cash, but more concerned about how can I stack more Bitcoin?
mm.
That's my savings account. That's my future.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I in the real world, I work in fine art and music, and it's one of the reasons I came into this world, was particularly around provenance and what it can do for fine art in the real world. And one of the things I'm very familiar with is how closely investment art sits with people who are looking to invest their money beyond, putting it into, stocks and shares and gold and these finance houses that do all their stuff. So that's my fascination with it, is I think there is a next level or a layer, when you kind of do take your loan and you spend your loan on art. So you've got your money sort of appreciating in so many more ways. And I think the way I look at art and its journey and where it's going to be in 10 years time, we're busy buying the Mona Lisas of the world at the moment when it comes to fine art. Do you own any fine art on Bitcoin, any ordinals?
I will not dox my wallet, but
Oh,
I
okay.
I
Do you like
did.
any of the artists? Do you like any of the artists, shall I say?
Um, there's some really cool things. Yes, absolutely. Without starting a political war or debate on who's right and who's wrong and who's a scammer and whatever, there's definitely some cool stuff that's
I hope
on.
you've got a ninja. I hope you've got a ninja. I won't. Okay, let's
Uh,
keep it there. We won't talk your wallet.
I did have ninjas. Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yes. But I think Ordinals is still very, very cool. It's still at the forefront of me on a daily basis, always checking Magicated, and looking at all the prices. Sometimes having a laugh, to be honest, because I see the Discord in X around certain collections and the founders of certain collections not being liked by certain group of people and
Yeah,
the kind of infighting. So it's just kind of par for the course. I think there's some cool art on there. I just recently haven't been buying. I
yeah,
have been more or less stacking stacks,
yeah,
and yeah, it's just something that's obviously close to my heart from where I got started in this whole thing. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, I'm obviously I'm collecting and I'm loving it. There's so many. I try and tell people about it, and they just look at me. But what's interesting is here in South Africa. Just a side note, and this is where it becomes so interesting. Our one of our biggest art collections was sort of in the care of the government, and they had let it go. Kind of, nobody had taken care of it, and these artworks are now currently being restored. And I know the woman who's involved with the project. And we were having dinner the other day, and I said to her, "So they documenting the artworks?" I said to her, "Well, how are you documenting this? The stuff that literally was nearly lost, right?" And she was like, "Well, we've, on the cloud." That's where they say we follow it. And I said to her, "Okay, I have got to tell you about ordinals." So they're very interested in, that's why I said to you, the provenance of it is extraordinary, because if you have a case like this where fine art is lost or is under threat in some way. Anyway, so I think it's very exciting in all ways. But anyway, it's not
yeah.
about
No,
that.
I hope that nobody's listening to this and thinking that, oh, Kevin is bearish on ordinals. I'm not. So
No,
just in case if anybody's no, not you, but if anybody else is watching and listening, like, oh, Kevin's so bearish on ordinals. I'm not bearish on ordinals. I just haven't bought anything recently.
no, neither have I either. I'm happy to say it. Okay, let's talk about AI. Um, let's talk about. I just sort of got involved with in the Discord and chatting to the guys of Satoshi AI. Um, and I'm just interested in your thoughts on it. I'm not too familiar with what's going on in the ecosystem, the Bitcoin ecosystem at large. I obviously know I work very closely on stacks with what's going on. What are your thoughts about is it going to change? What it's going to change? Um, what is going to mean for builders and for users? What does it look like
Uh,
to you?
we had a period in time. It was a few months ago when it was kind of this like massive AI launchpad token bubble. right? Where like everybody was launching an AI agent.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, there are probably like millions of them. Everybody had one. They all did their own cool little thing. And I think what everybody realized is like, well, damn, these server costs are quite expensive.
Yeah.
Um, these models are quite expensive to run. So I think, generally speaking, we hit that massive spike very early, right? Which I think
Yeah.
showed that there's quite a lot of interest. And from the VC perspective, there's a lot of interest as well. Like AI is a very hot narrative. I think we hit that spike super early, and it went away just as fast. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
think what what happened is like all the BS is kind of getting pushed to the side, right? And like the real things are starting to actually be built. So one of the theses that I'm working on that I'm going to be publishing soon is around AI agents. If they reach and achieve some level of autonomy, what payment methods will they potentially prefer? And the thesis is that if you have the chance to potentially um, be in an economy which is kind of created from scratch, and you have the ability to pay and be paid in a particular asset, I would not pick any other asset other than Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that there are ways for that to happen where AI agents will be able to pay each other in Bitcoin at a very fast speed because you know the processes need to happen very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there is a company that we are in the last phases of our due diligence and potentially making an investment that is going to be focusing on building kind of this highway for payments for AI agents on Bitcoin, which is quite cool.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think we're super early in this. Other than that, I mean, we use ChatGPT every damn day. Probably, I use it. I use it very often. I think, generally speaking, we're seeing a lot of really cool things being built with AI. So we're
Yeah.
seeing, people build applications in, days instead of months, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing applications that are generating millions of dollars in revenue that was predominantly built by one person that's utilizing AI tools. Um, I think
Crazy.
a lot of the things that I've read around, where people think AI is going is predominantly around the reduction of like manpower to be able to achieve the very first level of success, product
Mm,
market fit, right?
mm,
AI will accelerate your ability to reach product market fit.
yeah.
Now, where you go from there and how you scale it, I think will eventually require people.
Yeah.
But I think we are seeing a boom of like a very small number of people building really big businesses.
Mm,
And we're seeing it from kids that are in high school. Like I think the Cal AI app that popped up on my X, where you can snap a picture of what you're eating and it, utilizes AI to count your calories and track your calories. I think the app generated like $30 million in revenue, and it's him and a couple of people. But like this is the really cool stuff, right? I mean, years ago when we wanted to build an MVP, we had to go try to find a developer to build it. We had to go maybe outsource it to somewhere. Now that might not even have to happen. So I think as a lot of more of the infrastructure in Web3 starts to be built out, better APIs, much easier ways of being able to integrate certain services, better docs. I think we're going to start seeing a whole bunch of new applications happen in all these ecosystems, and they're going to come out very quickly. They're going
mm,
to come out really, really quickly, right? So, like, if we wanted to build something and we need an indexer, we can take the docs, probably pop it into uh, whether it's ChatGPT or Cursor or whatever, and it
mm,
would probably build out something that we wanted to build out in a very short amount of time.
yeah.
And we can see if that reaches product market fit. If it does it, then we trash it, right? I think we're going to start seeing like hyper um, like movement around the number of builders that should be building
Mm.
on Web3 because of this.
Yeah. I think it's I think it's also about how our ideas are presented. You know, if you kind of look historically, you first had to speak about your idea. That was how we presented our ideas to each other. We moved through the phases of I could send you a fax of my idea, you know, um, or I could then email you my idea. Now we're at a point where I think exactly that. Your ideas can become real very, very quickly without having to also test by saying, okay, I've got an idea right now. I have to find 10 people to help me make this idea happen. Now what you're going to be presented with, I think, as when it comes to investment, is like, this is what it actually can look like, you know. Um, so I think that's the very exciting part of it as well. you know. I mean, I've never coded anything in my life, and my son doesn't like doing, the the back end coding of things. He likes doing the animation and the scripting and all in the front. So he's like moaning and moaning. So I said, okay, let's have a look. Got ChatGPT, went into the one with the coding. We built a game in a weekend. I was like, oh my God, I'm a coder now. So it's so exciting for me, yeah. And I think where, to me, it becomes exciting as well. I was talking about me playing around earlier with Bitcoin, with DeFi. It is confusing. And I think for the normies, getting from terribly confusing, which is what DeFi is right now, and wallets, and that, people are scared of them, to, mass adoption. I think in a way, AI might be helpful there, even though I'm very scared because so often it's wrong, so I wouldn't actually
Mhm.
trust my money so much right now with AI. But I think, where you can have a wallet that just tells you exactly kind of what to do and what the best things are that are going on that day, because it's very hard to choose. You've got all these, you look on any one of these websites with Bitflow and Zest and stacking DAO, whatever, what to do with my Bitcoin or my stacks. And I'm like, oh my God. So I can only imagine, as someone I'm familiar with, a normie would just go like, I don't even know what thing. So I kind of think maybe that's what it is. It's being able to take it all and put it in one app, all these apps, and it's just like a DeFi, just says DeFi. And but I mean, you go on your banking app and it's got like a whole bunch of different things that you can then do. It kind of guides you to.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like
yeah.
you
No, I
need a
think
financial advisor. You have a financial advisor in the real world. You don't go along and do all this stuff with you. Just say like, okay, it's high risk, it's medium risk, and it's low risk. Yes, I'm investing in that.
yeah, I think it's a good point. Around. I think what really the big problem is like the UX and the UI of everything, right?
Mm,
It's like um, a, a lot of people are not really thinking, okay, well, in the Web2 world, this is the very prototypical UX UI flow of a particular product, right? And I'm someone who kind of comes from the product background. Like before I did all this Web3 stuff, I was a head of product for a Web2 company,
mm,
where I also had to learn how to code because we had a shortage of software engineers. So really, I think some of the best founders that I've seen at like the earliest stages have like a very clean and quick setup, right? It's like Next Vercel, maybe I'll probably use Tailwind or some wrapper around Tailwind to kind of get things up and running. I don't have to worry about my UI. It's very standard. Everything is straight out of the box. It's really easy, right? All I have to do with Tailwind is really just look at all the classes, pick my colors, and I'm done.
mm,
Um, and I think we're we're kind of completely forgetting. It's like we keep building for like the people that are already here, and like we need to also be able to obfuscate some of these really ridiculous complexities and present a product that is also available for other people who are maybe coming into the ecosystem.
mm,
Because you're right? It's like um and I'm not saying this about any of the companies on Stacks, because I think a lot of the companies on Stacks have done a really fantastic job of being able to make it really clear, right, of how to
mm,
use a product, what to do. But sometimes you just have to take a step back and like look at the apps that you're using in your non on chain life and see
mm,
some of the great things that they're doing, right? Like a popover, an eye that you can click that tells you what the hell you're talking about in this particular aspect of it.
Mm,
Like all these little things are all UX and UI components that can make DeFi great.
mhm,
We're starting to get there. We're starting
mm,
to get there.
mm,
But I think it all starts with the wallets, honestly. The whole wallet experience right now is just totally broken, in my opinion.
mm.
Um, I think a lot of people don't know what the hell is going on. They don't know what they're signing half the time.
Yeah.
And it's just an absolutely horrible experience for any new person jumping into
So
crypto.
if you unlist, the best experience is please unlist an ordinal from Magic Eden because you are going to get 700 million Bitcoin. Because it literally, when
Oh,
you press,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like,
I was
you will,
confused. I was like,
yeah,
yeah.
you will receive 7 million Bitcoin. And I'm like, well, how? I'm not even selling this. I'm getting it back and all this Bitcoin. um,
Yeah. Yeah.
for me, one of the things I've thought is, and it goes back to what you were saying just now about how Bitcoin will, or the apps will be country specific because it makes sense because everybody's got, different languages, different whatever. It's Bitcoin almost needs to be all these different kinds of fiat, but in one, you know. Um, but one of the things I was thinking is it's almost as if each platform should have its own wallet rather. So the platform and the wallet are one thing, and all the wallets speak to each other. Because I don't know if that's probably not because you're not going to want to have 60 wallets, but so that is why I do not work in DeFi because that's not an idea that you would invest in. Yeah, because it feels to me there's like a disconnect between my wallet and what I can do my with my coins. You know, it's I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
If if we were to think of, you know, where does the power really sit? Does the power really sit with the DeFi dApps that currently exist? Or does the power sit at the very first touch point of you entering a particular ecosystem?
Mm,
Right. And I think that very first touch point is most likely going to be your wallet, right? Whether it's going to be on your phone, or it's going to be as a browser extension, or
100.
it's going to be your ledger connected to an app on your phone that you can view your account. Um, at the end of the day, the wallet is where the users are coming from,
Mm,
right? Which is why we see when the wallet enables a swapping mechanism in the wallet, it drives such a significant amount of volume, like a
mhm,
significant amount of volume to any of these, dApps.
mhm,
And it's because they hold the power. Now, historically, the difficult thing for a wallet has been, if they were going to launch a token, like how many wallets realistically have a token? Like it's not a
mm,
typical thing to do, right? Um, and I think that's where like the disconnect is. It's like we used to live in this world where like you could launch a token and it could reach $1 billion. But
mhm.
now we're transitioning into a world of like, does your app actually make freaking money? Like,
Yeah,
can you generate revenue? Do you have people that are actually using it?
yeah,
Or are you just going to have an potentially inflate the price? Like,
mhm,
these things all matter. And we are living in this world where those two things don't connect.
yeah,
The value of your business, if you launch a token, may not reflect how much revenue you're generating as a business. And the
mm,
valuation of how you would typically value a company, not an on-chain company, like a typical Web2 company based on revenue, based on EBITDA, et cetera, is so
yeah,
tragically different from sometimes the on-chain
mhm,
token value. So, I think this all goes to say, like, obviously, I think we're really early. The winners will continue to be winners. I think the failures will fail very, very quickly.
mm,
Um, in the Stacks ecosystem, since we are talking to a bunch of Stacks people, I think we have some very clear winners, some very, very clear winners. And we should, as an ecosystem of people who love Stacks, we have to continuously talk about the Stacks ecosystem because
mhm,
it is so significantly undervalued, like really,
mm,
really undervalued. The the efficiency of Stacks as an ecosystem and the amount of TVL in DeFi is is quite frankly great.
Mm,
Right? We have a lot of stacks participating in DeFi all across stacks, whether they're stacking it on Stack and DAO, and then they're utilizing that to take out a loan or whatever. I mean, we have applications that we all know very clearly. Okay, this is the application to do X, Y, Z.
mm,
Right? If I'm in another ecosystem, frankly, maybe because I'm not so, you know, there from the very beginning, I have no freaking idea. Like
mm,
absolutely no idea. So we might be in a small ecosystem today, but I think we should love and appreciate the fact that we have great builders. We have
mm,
great investors that are investing in these companies that are pushing them and putting them in a position to succeed. And I personally think, Kyle, who I used to report to when I was at Bitcoin Frontier Fund, is doing a fantastic job. I think Munib is doing a fantastic job. And I just feel very strongly about where Stacks is positioned moving
mm.
forward to the future.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think it goes back to a couple of things we've spoken about. I think most important, and this even when you were talking about AI, and it went back to what we were talking about in the beginning when I said, is about the people. You know, people is one thing that AI can never be, and again, when you look at this ecosystem and how these are people that have been around for a long time, a lot of people that have worked for not much. It's not like this pump and dump kind of, it's people who believe in something, I find with our community. And that the value in that is extraordinary. You sort of obviously dip your toes into other ecosystems. I sometimes I just get like, ooh, that doesn't feel nice. So yeah, I love the ecosystem and the things that are being built on here. Like you say, the apps are easy to use in many ways. Things are very clear. So yeah. All right, we haven't got much time left, but I do have one or two questions to ask you. What do you think? I've just been thinking a lot recently. I wrote an article the other day about this kind of idea that you've got governments and companies like strategy buying up like huge amounts of Bitcoin. What is your take on that? Because doesn't that give them a certain amount of power that they have the funds right now? Because to me, and I understand that, it's a peer-to-peer, how it was designed was to be a cash system, you know. Um, but I feel like I almost wanted it to stay underground so that everybody could get a piece of the pie before it became like big chunks were being cut out and handed out to these people. It frightens me that we all rejoicing about price go up, but how is that price going up? What it's not the man in the streets. I mean, it is partially, but I don't know. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh,
Is it too
that's
much? Is that
a
not an
that
answer?
that is a loaded question. That's like the ultimate answer to all questions in the world.
It's like, who
So
am I? Namaste.
um, you know, uh, funny enough, I think, like I had said earlier, we're going to see one or two companies in every single country basically replicate what strategy is doing. It's going to happen. I've had several conversations in the last week about multiple companies doing it, and they're currently raising capital. Um, so it is going to happen. It will happen, and I think it's going to happen very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Now, it's kind of like the moment where I don't remember exactly what that time frame was, but there was a moment where a lot of the miners were kind of shifting from Asia and then moving to the US.
Hmm.
And we all had, is this too much concentration amongst the miners? Is this too much concentration amongst the pools themselves? Like, you know, what is the attack vector that's possible on the horizon here? Are we going to be totally screwed, et cetera, et cetera? At the end of the day, because it is decentralized, there will be new powers that come into play that fight for a percentage of market ownership. And I
Mm.
think it's going to happen. It's going to be the same way with all these companies doing this, right? If they're all looking at this because historically they've seen the price of their stock go up, right? It's driven by that, right? It's driven by the shareholder value can significantly increase
Mhm.
if I convert my company, which had a significant amount of operating overhead, and I'm going to slash all that. I'm going to take my cash and I'm going to go buy Bitcoin because the
Mm.
narrative has proven to work. Um, so I think we're going to start seeing more and more of these companies compete for that. So maybe the market share will be extremely high for one company today, but tomorrow you're going to have another big player come in, and then that market share might lower, right?
Mm.
And things might get to a level of like equilibrium. We're going to have some big players, maybe 5, 6%.
Mm.
But then I think we're also going to start to get this decentralized version of this kind of TradFi strategy across all these different countries, because all these
Mm.
countries are going to all put resources together to be able to buy Bitcoin. Right? All
Mm.
these banks, all these central banks, governments, et cetera, they're going to buy. And if they're all buying, and then all these companies are buying, then we don't just have Strategy 21 and a couple of others, right? The number goes from 4 to 10 to 100 to 1,000, and then we're just creating another version of decentralization in the sense of the holder, right? We're decentralizing the big holders over time as well.
Right.
So um, I think generally there's concern, if anybody's using leverage, of course, right? I think that's like the number one question: is anybody dumb enough to do that, to get liquidated fully? Is anybody dumb enough to do that?
Yeah.
Um, Second concern is obviously security of the assets themselves. I believe a significant portion of the Bitcoin is in the custody of Coinbase, if I'm not wrong.
Mm.
So I think over time, we would want, as concerned citizens in the Bitcoin ecosystem, we would want to see a little bit more of a decentralization of the custodian risk as well.
Mhm.
Um, So I think like we're just at the very beginning of this whole thing. And like I said, as more players come in, and you're gonna start seeing them in like the next quarter or so, there's gonna be one in every country. And they're all raising a ton of capital to be able to replicate exactly what strategy is doing. So strategy is gonna have a lot of competition, and that competition is just gonna kind of decentralize this whole strategy idea. And I think the more players there are, the better it is, because it takes away the potential from that one player being too big over
Mhm.
the course of time.
Yeah, because then that is a worry. Are you going to Bitcoin Vegas?
I will not be at Bitcoin Vegas. I will not be.
Okay.
Um, Not a big fan of Vegas, generally speaking, but I will be. I will be at Bitcoin Hong Kong. That's
Okay.
100% obviously is much closer for me.
Mhm.
And I will also be at Token in Singapore. So those are the two events for me this year. We have a lot of stuff on our plate with the fund Sats Ventures. So we're really focused on that right now, and I think there's going to be some really exciting things coming up for us.
Anything you want to talk about? Tell us about?
I can't just yet.
All right. All right. Next time, I'll have to have you back for a full Sats Ventures show because I mean that's
Absolutely,
very exciting, isn't it? I mean, it's a year now. I think it's almost a
it's
year since you
almost
guys.
almost a year. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Very exciting. Um, okay. Um, let's, I think, ask a final question. We are over time. So let's give a little bit, sort of close out with some advice to people out there who um, would like to reach out to you. Are you open to that? Are you open to people putting something in your DMs? How should they approach you if they want to? Um, and maybe just a little bit of advice, yeah, for young builders that are in school still, probably at this rate.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, I think this is young builders in general. Find an ecosystem that is really open and welcoming to you. find a founder of that ecosystem that shares very similar values to you, of how they can work with you to grow the ecosystem. Because this is really, really important, right? A lot of people are trying to build everything on every chain. And like that's really difficult to do, obviously. And sometimes founders want to build something on a particular chain, but do not get the support of the founding team, the foundation, the funds that are investing into that ecosystem. So um, for founders, look at the ecosystem, look at the people in the ecosystem. Are those the people that you want to be associated with? Because if it is, then that is the right ecosystem for you.
Mm.
Talk to the foundation, make sure that they're the right people that you want to work with on a day-to-day basis, because they will support you.
Mhm.
Talk to the founders of that particular chain and that ecosystem, and make sure that that's somebody that you want to be aligned with. Like, this is so important, and it is quite possibly the most important thing out there, is to
Mm.
make sure that you are building in a place where other people are open and welcoming to you and your ideas.
Mm.
So that's my number one suggestion to all
That's
builders out
brilliant
there.
advice. Yeah, that is brilliant.
Um, the second thing is, you don't need to have a product right away to be able to talk to investors. But when you talk to investors, make sure that you have an idea of how you can and will build a product. So what I'm saying is, you don't need to have like traction immediately right away for an investor to potentially consider investing. But what you do need is to have all of your ducks in a row. You need to look extremely prepared. So what does that mean? You need to have, for me, my personal opinion is that I prefer having someone write what they want to do, their research, etc., on a Notion doc, sharing it publicly, and putting it into a Papermark account. Papermark is like DocSend, but it's free for the first 50 documents, and you can password gate a Notion doc. Key
Yeah.
advice, if anybody's listening.
Okay.
You don't have to pay for that hefty DocSend bill. Put that in a in a Papermark, put it into a Notion, share it across, get some feedback, get the investor involved. Right, start
Mm.
building the relationship. And when you get to that point where you have a really good relationship with an investor, you might be able to get your very first check, which will put you on your way to living out your dreams and building out this product that you really want to build.
Mm.
This is at the very core, this is a people business. Like, you
Mm.
can build the coolest thing in the world. If you're an asshole, like, nobody's going to want to work with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So, um, investors are people at the end of the day, although they are the people who have a fiduciary responsibility to their investors. They're the ones who are looking at an opportunity and making a decision if they want to move forward or not. And a
Mhm.
lot of that, if you're operating in the early stage, like we are at Sats Ventures, is all about people, right? We want
Mhm.
to know, are you a good actor? Do you know
Mhm.
what you're talking about? Do you have the charisma and the ability to talk to other people and to build relationships and to make partnerships, etc.?
Mhm.
And do you have the technical talent to be able to deliver on this? But
Mhm.
we expect you to pivot very quickly. We don't want you to sit on an idea, be married to an idea. So, all this factors into the super, super early stage. So
Mhm.
I'll probably put a post out at some point in the next couple of days of like the first few things that you need to get out there to go race. And I think a lot of people always ask this, but
Yeah.
I'll I'll put a post out. So if anybody's following me, or if anybody wants to follow me, I'll put something out,
Mm.
give some easy tips. But those are the tips that I care about the most.
I think that is something kind of, if I had to, have a look at, because I worked with I was part of the team with Hero Gamer who built out the Stats D grants program, cohort 1 and cohort 2. And it seemed to come over and over again is like, where, where do we get info, and what do we need? And it took us actually quite a while to put together like the pack of like, okay, this is what we want from people to see. Okay, this is a good idea and that's a crappy idea, and you've got to be able to decide by reading something and then having a conversation with them. Um, will you at Sats Ventures, are you going to be putting things out there, or are these questions I shouldn't be asking because these are news? Sort of like, cohorts, and are you looking to invest further into the Bitcoin sort of, I don't want to say L2 because it's so much more than L2 ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've invested into companies that are building stacks. We've
Mm,
invested into Signa, who's probably the number one multi-sig protocol on multiple Bitcoin L2s as well as Bitcoin L1. Similarly with Coffer Network. Coffer Network is also on multiple L2s as well as Bitcoin L1. We've invested into SaaS Terminal, which is obviously aggregating across Bitcoin L1. And I think they made an announcement that they're going to be integrating with Alkanes very recently. We've invested into Hermetica. We've
mm.
invested into
Oh,
Bima, which is multi-chain. Um, on a
that's
personal level,
huge.
huh?
That's huge. That's a lot of that's a lot of stuff. That's amazing.
Yeah, for us, I think right now we have a portfolio of I believe 14 or 15 companies. What
Okay.
I'm really excited about is people are starting to think outside the box, which is like
Mm,
absolutely awesome. I'll give you one really cool example, right? The team over at Lemon Drop, the founders are obviously well known for building out Bitcoin layers. Uh, when they told me that what they wanted to build with Lemon Drop, I was like, oh, that is really freaking cool. Like that is really, really freaking cool that I can do all my VGen stuff on Solana and still be able to stack Bitcoin, right? I mean, like that is such an outside of the kind of box idea because a lot of people really weren't thinking about it. Uh, but just kind of going where all the users are. So I think for me, obviously, a lot of our investments are DeFi heavy, or solutions to Bitcoin scaling heavy. But this is, I think, like we're looking at some of the really cool and interesting things, and also the cornerstones of kind of where we think Bitcoin DeFi will be moving forward.
mm,
So one of your questions earlier was, can anybody reach out? Absolutely. I know some people have reached out in my X DMs, and the only problem with X and like the messaging is it's so hard to keep track, between Telegram, email, and then X, and then life on WhatsApp or whatever else. Like, there's just too many things going on. Um, so I think if anybody does reach out and uh, I can verify that you are not a bad actor, then I'll probably just share my Telegram and continue the conversation there.
yeah. No, I agree. If somebody could just build that app where I could just have one app and all my communication went inside there, because I'm as well. And then there's groups. The first half of my Twitter, my DMX, it sounds like a buck. My X DMs are just groups as well that I actually secretly just want to leave, but I can't because then it says Melanie left the group, and it's like, oh God.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, wow. Well, it was we've gone well over time, but what a fantastic conversation. I hope you enjoyed being with us today. Is there any sort of final Kevin wisdom that you want to share? Any final words
Um,
before we close out?
First and foremost, I want to thank you for inviting me on the show. I know we've been trying to figure out the right date and time, so I appreciate you being flexible. I thought this was fantastic. I love these kind of just super casual conversations. Um, Many times when we do podcasts or we do X Spaces, it's like very kind of regimented. So this was really nice that it was just kind of a free flow conversation about Bitcoin. And I hope that people follow your show and follow you if they haven't already. And if anybody wants to reach out and connect with me, please make sure you follow me. It's probably the simplest X handle ever, Kevin Williams, my first and my last name. Um, and then if you want to follow Sats Ventures, it's Sats_Ventures. We will be hosting X Spaces next week. We have two really awesome ones happening on Tuesday and Thursday. The one on Tuesday is with the Sats Terminal team. and then the one on Thursday is with the Lemon Drop team. So
I'll
uh,
tune in if I'm awake.
yeah, please make sure to follow Sats Ventures on X so you can see the announcement, or follow me because I'll probably be reposting it. But we're gonna start doing a lot more of these X spaces. Would love to have you on one as well at some point in the future.
I'd love to.
We want to, speak about some of these amazing companies that we've invested into.
Mm.
Some fantastic founders. So, we're really, really excited.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you as well for staying up. For those who don't know, it is
After
it's
midnight now.
yeah. And you still look like Cinderella, so look at that.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so just thank you for joining me. I really enjoyed the conversation today. And thank you everybody for tuning in. Please remember, every Thursday at 12 p.m. ET, I am here, Bitcoin and Beyond. Thank you very much to Deorganized Media and Peace Love in the background, helping this all happen. So yeah, I think there's things YouTubers say, hit the like, subscribe, and follow button on my YouTube channel so that you can
Yeah.
catch the shows that I do every week. I've got a great guest that joins me every week for our casual conversation. So yeah, have a good evening and see you soon.
Thank you.